وإنك لعلى خلق عظيم فستبصر ويبصرون.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Thumma ma ba'd, a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim. So, previously, we discussed the rebuilding of the Kaaba and the Black Stone and the important role that the Prophet ﷺ he had, and he resolved the issue of the Black Stone, and everybody was happy. And we mentioned a few other points about this is a sign of the revelation to come and the proof of the truthfulness of the Prophet ﷺ. And we started talking about the history of the Kaaba and the importance of the Kaaba. And we started talking about the timeline. When was the Kaaba first built? And some narrations which told us that it was Adam alayhi salam actually, the first human being Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created, and his wife Hawa, who actually built the Kaaba. Adam alayhi salam was the first one to do the tawaf around the Kaaba as well. And then we talked about how after this, some narrations mentioned that every single prophet, they actually visited the Kaaba as well. And we talked about how Ibrahim alayhi salam, he raised the foundations of the Kaaba with the son, Ismail alayhi salam, and how the black stone at that time was placed by Jibril alayhi salam in its place. So just continuing on, and this is again, we're just gonna talk about some history of the Kaaba and what's happened to the Kaaba since then to bring it to how it is now. There have been some other reconstructions as well. So this narration that we were talking about last week, continuing on, the narration goes on to say, so we got up to the time of Ibrahim alayhi salam, and we said how he and his son Ishmael alayhi salam raised the foundations of the Kaaba. And then what happened was after this, after Ibrahim alayhi salam, the Kaaba started to crumble again and deteriorate again. Who was the next people who actually did a rebuild? These people are called the Amalek people. These people who later lived, in the area of Mecca, these people, the Amalek people, they reconstructed, they renovated the Kaaba as well. Then, after many centuries, it started to crumble and fall apart again because, they don't have the equipment that we have nowadays. They had stones and the way they were building it, they don't have cement. So obviously the Kaaba is not going to last that long. After the Amalek people, who are the next people? These are the people of Jurhum. Jurhum. The Jurhum people, they were, so after many centuries, after the Amalek people, the Jurhum people, another race, a tribe that lived there in Mecca, they reconstructed it. Then it started to fall apart again. And then after this, the people of the Quraysh rebuilt it. And this is the time that we talked about last time. So the Quraysh were the next people to perform a major renovation of the Kaaba, as we talked about last time. That was, of course, when the Prophet ﷺ, he was involved and he resolved the issue of the black stone and he took a major part in the renovation. This is that time. This is at that time. And this brings us up to what we've discussed so far. So this is just talking about, before this time of the black stone and the Prophet ﷺ, it was the people of Jurhum, the Amalek people, and before that is Ibrahim alayhi salam. And just going back in history. So we've got up to the point now of the Prophet ﷺ and the Quraysh. So they rebuilt the Kaaba at this time. So at this time, it's quite interesting as well. What was the Prophet ﷺ thinking at this time? And meaning, it said that the Prophet ﷺ, he informed the Sahaba, the companions. It's actually a narration of Aisha, radiallahu anha, in which she says that during the conquest of Makkah, the Fath Makkah, when the Muslims, during the conquest, where they came from Medina, they came over Makkah, they took Makkah over without having a battle, without having a war. When they cleaned out the Kaaba at that time, they purified it and they started establishing the Salat and the proper worship there. At that time, the Prophet ﷺ, he told Aisha radiallahu anha about the original construction of the Kaaba, and he shared with her what the Kaaba originally looked like. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ told her, including its shape and construction. He mentioned, and this is the time of the Fath Makkah. So this is after the time obviously of the Black Stone. This is fast forwarding when the Prophet ﷺ, he's the messenger. They've come back to Makkah, the conquest of Makkah. And the Prophet ﷺ is telling Aisha, his wife, radiallahu anha, about how the Kaaba looked like, the original construction. He mentioned that it used to have two doors. It used to have two doors, and it used to have, and the Hatim, which is now, that semicircle area which you said, which is marked to indicate this is a part of the Kaaba. He said this was actually originally a part of the structure. So now it's outside the Kaaba, but this semicircle was a part of the Kaaba and it had two doors. So this is a hadith found in Bukhari and Muslim. The Prophet ﷺ said, if it wasn't for the fact that your people are still new to Islam, meaning if they had not recently converted, because a lot of Muslims, a lot of new Muslims, a lot of people they converted to Islam during the conquest of Makkah, and the Prophet ﷺ saying, if it wasn't for the fact that there's so many people who are new Muslims now, I would have rebuilt the Kaaba with two doors and included the Hatim in its structure. So he's saying, the Prophet ﷺ, he's saying, I would have rebuilt the Kaaba with two doors and included this semicircle structure within this semicircle shape in the actual structure. He explained that the Quraysh did not have enough money to do the full and proper construction of the Kaaba, and this is why it has a slightly different shape today as well. So by understanding this, what the Prophet ﷺ is saying, you can understand, at the time when the Quraysh rebuilt the Kaaba, when it needed that reconstruction, at that time it had two doors, isn't it? It had two doors, and the Hatim area, that Hatim area was a part of the Kaaba at that time. But when they rebuilt the Kaaba, when the Prophet ﷺ, he resolved the Blackstone issue. If you remember, they got rid of one of the doors, and the Hatim, they marked it because it became outside the Kaaba. But the Prophet ﷺ is saying, if it was up to me, I would have gone back to that way. And I would have rebuilt it again, put two doors in there, and I would have included the Hatim inside the Kaaba. That's what he's saying to his wife, Aisha radiallahu anha, at the time of the conquest of Makkah. And like we said, the reason why the Hatim was left outside is because the Quraysh did not have enough funds to do the full and proper construction of the Kaaba. So he also mentioned something interesting. If it wasn't too traumatic for your people, I would have done a complete reconstruction of the Kaaba. I have created an eastern door. I would have created a western door, including the Hatim, within the construction of the Kaaba. So this hadith, like we said, it's in Sahih Muslim and Bukhari, and the Prophet ﷺ is saying is very sensitive to the situation of the people because the people have recently converted to Islam, right? That's why he's saying this might be too traumatic for the people if I break all of this down again, like the Quraysh had reconstructed it and put it back into that state. So this is something we can see that the Prophet ﷺ here is very sensitive to people and their customs, their culture, their traditions, and he's keeping in mind, where they're coming from. That's very important, and that's something that we can learn. It's part of the Sunnah and the Seerah to be sensitive to people's situations. And this does not mean, for example, you compromise on your religion, you go against the religion, but it's understanding that at times, if something is not absolutely, like fundamental, like it's not fard, it's not absolutely obligatory, we need to be sensitive to people's situations. And not put people off. And that's why he was very careful. He said that I would have liked to, rebuild the Kaaba and put two doors back in place and have that Hatim back as part of the Kaaba. But because there's so many people that recently converted to Islam, it would have been too traumatic. So I didn't do that. So he kept it how it was. And for example, there was an experience of a person, and this is like a story of a person who accepted Islam in middle school. And he faced challenges because in the school there were people that weren't very sensitive to the fact that he's a new Muslim, and even other Muslims were not very sensitive to this. And for instance, he struggled to pray in Arabic. Like he couldn't pray in Arabic because he didn't know the language. He became confused about how to pray, and he was not able to pray in Arabic because he didn't understand the language. And other people, they did not like support him, for example. So the fact was, people were too harsh on him. You have to pray in Arabic because otherwise, your prayer is not accepted. But he didn't understand Arabic, and he started to get like this trauma about, oh, I don't know, is my prayer, should I even pray at all? Do you understand? So slowly, slowly, like even, going slowly with people, understanding the situation. And that's something the Prophet ﷺ did with people. It's a way that we should learn from this to be very sensitive to the situation of a person and where they're coming from and understanding that before, putting your point across before doing things. So this is an example which shows, obviously sensitivity and in this particular case, supporting new Muslims, but going easy on people. So the scholars use this hadith and this instance from the Prophet ﷺ's life to highlight the importance of being very considerate to people's situations, like we said. And the Prophet ﷺ, he explained to Aisha, radiallahu anha, who could understand the situation, that while he knew how the Kaaba should be, like he knew that this is how the Kaaba should really be, it should really have two doors, and the semicircle bit should really be inside it. He chose not to make those changes at that time because it would be people would not be able to handle these changes. You understand? So this is something that we learned, something interesting. So just having talked about this, just moving on now. After the Prophet ﷺ, who was the next person to reconstruct or rebuild the Kaaba? So now we're going after the time of the Prophet ﷺ, after his passing away, to talk a little bit about the period after this. What exactly happened to the Kaaba? So again, we're talking about this because it's a part of the Seerah. we're on this point, and previous scholars have talked about this. They use this as a good time to mention some of the history of the Kaaba. So, what happened to the Kaaba to get up to the point that we see today? Now, this is quite interesting. Abdullah bin Zubair radiallahu anhu, so he was a Sahabi, a companion. Abdullah bin Zubair, who later on he was in charge of Makkah, like he was the mayor of Makkah, if you like he was the governor of Makkah, he was the mayor of Makkah. When he was the mayor of Makkah, he knew he knew this because one of his main teachers was who? One of his teachers was Aisha radiallahu anha. Like that was one of the teachers of Abdullah bin Zubair. So knowing this from his teacher, Aisha radiallahu anha, and what did we say? What did the Prophet ﷺ tell Aisha? He told her that I would have had two doors, or I would have included the Hatim in the structure. So Abdullah bin Zubair, when he was radiallahu anhu, when he was the mayor of Makkah, he learned from Aisha radiallahu anha. So he decided to fulfill what the Prophet ﷺ had wanted. And he did a complete reconstruction of the Kaaba. He renovated the Kaaba, and what did he do? He made two doors. He made two doors for it and included the Hatim, the semicircle bit. He included that into the shape of the Kaaba. So the Kaaba was like a rectangular shape with like a semicircle. That was all inside part of the Kaaba. He had two doors because Abdullah bin Zubair, he got it back to its original state, had the Prophet ﷺ how he had wished. This is what Abdullah bin Zubair he did, learning from Aisha radiallahu anha. But what happened next after this time? So now in history, just picture the Kaaba now has two doors and the semicircle bit is inside the Kaaba. So what happens next? So next comes someone by the name of Hajjaj bin Yusuf. Hajjaj bin Yusuf. Now, the thing is, Hajjaj bin Yusuf, what happened was after that, there was a Hajjaj bin Yusuf who was fighting actually on behalf of the Khalifa at the time. So this is another name, Abdul Malik bin Marwan. He's like the Khalifa. He's the overall in charge of the Muslims. So Hajjaj bin Yusuf, he defeated Abdullah bin Zubair. So Abdullah bin Zubair was basically killed. He was martyred by this person called Hajjaj bin Yusuf. And Abdullah bin Zubair, he became a shaheed at this time. And this guy called Hajjaj bin Yusuf, he was fighting on the side of the Khalifa, Malik bin Marwan. He defeated Abdullah bin Zubair. So look, the thing is our history. So you're probably listening, hearing this and thinking, what? The Muslims are fighting each other so soon after the Prophet ﷺ. Our history is what it is, and it has incidents. Unfortunately, happen because you get people who come into power, like even today, with not the best intentions and the best iman. And there was corruption, as there is today as well. And power does corrupt, money does corrupt. Hajjaj bin Yusuf had a very bad reputation, this guy. He used to execute and kill scholars and Sahaba, like, the companions of Prophet ﷺ used to kill them, like he had done with Abdullah bin Zubair, like a Sahabi. So you can imagine, like, this guy is quite corrupt. At this time, Hajjaj bin Yusuf, he killed Abdullah bin Zubair. He reclaimed control of the Kaaba, Makkah. And as Abdullah bin Zubair had been killed, and bin Zubair, what did he do? He did a complete reconstruction of the Kaaba, right? But now, Hajjaj, he wrote back to the leader at the time, Abdul Malik bin Marwan, the Khalifa, he's overall in charge of Makkah. He's saying, I've killed Abdullah bin Zubair, I've got control of Makkah, and he has made these changes to the Kaaba. So he told him what he did. Now, Abdul Malik, the Khalifa, the ruler of the time, he didn't fully know that Abdullah bin Zubair was only doing what he learned from Aisha radiallahu anha. Like, he didn't know this. He didn't know the reason why Abdullah bin Zubair had did a complete reconstruction of the Kaaba, why he included two doors in it and the semicircle. He didn't know this because he didn't know that the Prophet ﷺ had told this to Aisha radiallahu anha, and he had learned this from her. So he instructed Hajjaj bin Yusuf. What did the Khalifa do? Abdul Malik bin Marwan. He instructed Hajjaj bin Yusuf to undo the changes, basically. Undo the changes, and go against again and reconstruct the Kaaba and bring everything back down again, basically, to before. Boarding up the western door, just having one door, and leaving the Hatim, leaving one door, and leaving the semicircle Hatim outside. So that's what he did. He ordered this. So he removed the Hatim from the construction and he put the border back around it, redoing it. And just how it was when, the Quraysh were reconstructing it, and they reconstructed it like this. So Hajjaj bin Yusuf, on the command of the Khalifa, Abdul Malik bin Marwan, he reconstructed it, the Kaaba, back to the time of how the Quraysh had reconstructed it. You with me? When the Prophet ﷺ put the black stone back in place. So now the Kaaba was back to how it was at that time. So it had another major reconstruction, right? So, and remember, the Prophet ﷺ telling Aisha that he would have extended it if people could take it. And that's why Abdullah bin Zubair did what he did. So, what happened after this? After this, another leader comes along in the Islamic history. Another leader comes along, and years later, this time the Khalifa was Al-Mansur. Al-Mansur is a new Khalifa. So the previous Khalifa, he's now passed away. The new Khalifa is Al-Mansur. He consulted with Imam Malik. Imam Malik, rahimahullah, you know the great scholar Imam Malik. He was the Imam of Medina at that time. And this scholar, Imam Malik, who lived in
Mhm.
Medina, he basically lived in Medina. Al-Mansur, who was in charge of the Muslims, the Khalifa, he asked Imam Malik, okay, we realized that there's a hadith in place. The Prophet ﷺ, he had a wish that he wanted, he would have done this to the Kaaba. Like he would have had two doors, he would have included the Hatim, because remember, it's not like this at the moment. So he would have done this. And then he says Abdullah bin Zubair did that, what the Prophet ﷺ had wanted, but Hajjaj came along, he undid everything. Al-Mansur, he asked Imam Malik, the great scholar, if they should reconstruct the Kaaba again in the way the Prophet ﷺ had wanted it. So he said, shall we reconstruct it again? Shall we put two doors back in place? Shall we put the Hatim area back inside the Kaaba? Just the way Abdullah bin Zubair did. Shall we do that? What did Imam Malik say, the great scholar, rahimahullah? What did he say? He said, he advised against it. He said, no, leave it alone. Because the Prophet ﷺ, he left it alone as well. And that shows it's okay with the Prophet ﷺ. I don't want the kings to come along. That's what Imam Malik is saying. I don't want kings to come along after this and later on and turn the Kaaba into a toy. Like into a toy, making changes back and forth. Like one comes along, he breaks it. The next one comes along, he reconstructs it. Next one comes along, he reconstructs. He said, I don't want this happening to the Kaaba. Just leave it alone. Even though it's not how the Prophet ﷺ had expressed his wish, leave it alone. And that's what the great scholar Imam Malik advised. So the Kaaba was left as it was with one door and the Hatim outside the actual construction, but within the border. And that's how the Kaaba remains today. So if you go to Makkah now and you go to the Kaaba, the way it is today is just like the last time Al-Mansur, Imam Malik, in fact, it's still the same as when Hajjaj bin Yusuf, the corrupt tyrant, but obviously he reconstructed it back to how it was. It's now the same way as that, and it has one door, and it has like the Hatim, which is outside the Kaaba, but people still pray in it because it's considered inside actually a part of the Kaaba. But it's now, the Kaaba now is how it was at that time. So that's how it remains as it is today. And right now, so when you go there, and this is the same design as Al Mansur and Imam Malik. Imam Malik he advised as well. So finally, we're going to talk about, just to finish off, a couple of things that we see about the Kaaba as well, like a couple of other things. There are some details regarding the traditions that we see today. So one of these things we see is the Kiswa. The Kiswa. So what's the Kiswa? The Kiswa is, the covering of the Kaaba, like the cloth, like the black cloth with gold writing, which is around the Kaaba. Who started this off? Who started this tradition off? The first person to put the Kiswa, the cloth, on the Kaaba was, interestingly, Hajjaj bin Yusuf himself. Hajjaj bin Yusuf. So again, even though he used to kill, like, execute scholars and Sahaba, he still was the one to start this tradition of the Kiswa, the cloth, and put this cloth on the Kaaba. Although he was a terrible person, mass executions and all that, but he started this tradition. He still respected the Kaaba in that sense. And even today, this is a sign of respect, like this cloth that they put on the Kaaba. And finally, who actually started the expansion of the Haram? Meaning, the area around the Kaaba, which is constantly expanded, and people come, the rulers come and they build it. There's some traditions, some details about the Kaaba's expansion and who started this. The first person to start off the expansion of the Masjid al-Haram was first done by who? It was done by Umar ibn al-Khattab, radiallahu anhu. Umar ibn al-Khattab. So he was the Khalifa, the third. So after Abu Bakr, there was Umar, radiallahu anhu. He started off the expansion of the Haram. And what did he do? How did he expand the Haram? He bought houses, so you can understand that you picture it's the Kaaba. Around the Kaaba, there's various houses, but he wanted to expand because obviously the population of Muslims are increasing, isn't it? Even now, when you go to the Haram, like they do various expansions and there's a lot of people. So to expand the Haram, there were houses at the time. So what did he do? What he did was he bought the houses of the people and he compensated them, the owners, with money. Like he bought the properties, the houses around the Haram, and he gave money to the people who used to live there because he said, I'll give you money, I'll buy your house because I want to expand the Haram to accommodate the growing number of the Hajj, especially when people come on Hajj, the Hajj pilgrims. An example, for example, football example. When expanding a football stadium, like for example, recently, like Liverpool, is a good example that compared to, recently, like a few years back, they expanded the stadium at the Anfield and they bought some houses. Like people used to live in some houses on one side, and they actually bought them off the people because obviously they have to knock down the houses to expand the stadium. And they did that. So this is a proper way of doing it. They paid them, they relocated them compared to the wrong way. And which is the wrong way to do it? And the corrupt way, which has been done. And this is the corrupt way is it's been reported like this new city that they're building called Neom. The Saudi authorities are building this new city called Neom, and there's been reports that what they've done, they've captured homes killing local people, like like desert people, farm people, because they obviously want the space to build a city, and there's been lots of homes there. Instead of like compensating them, they've threatened them, and the people haven't got out, and they've basically killed the people. They've taken over, and they've just broken down, demolished the homes. That's the corrupt way of doing it. So what we're saying is that Umar ibn al-Khattab, he expanded the Haram in the correct way, purchasing the houses from the people. And later on, Uthman bin Affan, radiallahu anhu, he expanded it even further. And even Abdullah bin Zubair, who we talked about, he made further expansions. So when Abdullah bin Zubair, who we talked about, when he reconstructed the Kaaba, he also included different things like decorations and decorative things on and around the Kaaba as well. Okay. So even, when we go there today, you see like these beautiful construction decorations around the Kaaba, and there's something the Sahaba did as well, radiallahu anhum, they did as well. So they saw it as a sign of respect, and there's nothing wrong with that. So finally, just to conclude, there's one lesson we can just take away with us that it's a quite an important point for us that the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned how people they might beautify something, but they miss its true purpose. They miss the true purpose. So, for example, he talked about how people they would recite the Quran really beautifully, but it's not going to impact their hearts or change their lives because they very have a beautiful voice, but they're not understanding any of the Quran. And the Sahaba that we talked about, radiallahu anhum, they did not have to worry about this balance because they are people. They were like excellent people, right? They were the best of people. And when they beautified the Kaaba, so they did beautify the Kaaba, but their worship and their worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was of a very high quality. And their decoration, the beautifying was far less. And their worship, the dedication was far more. So they decorated the Kaaba, like we said, but they were very strong in the Iman as well. And they were pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Today, it's basically the reverse. So you can see today, nowadays, what happens is we might have more decoration than dedication. Yeah, you understand? We might have more decoration than Iman. So we can see, like beautiful masjids are built around the world. But what's the quality of the Iman? What's the quality of the Iman of the people, like the faith of people? What quality is there nowadays? Is there dedication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala around the world in the Muslim Ummah? A very high quality of Iman. Is that the case? What about the people that are in charge of like the states of the Muslims who may be spending thousands and thousands on building structures and bricks, but bricks and stones is not Iman. And what's Iman? Iman is submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's Iman. So this means we need to, obviously, what do we need to do? We have to improve ourselves. That's the thing. Push ourselves, improve our Iman. That's very important over these, just the materialistic things. Improve your khushu in your prayer and generally in your ibadah, in your worship. So we need to improve ourselves. This is what we're saying. Making Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala happy, that we are not too distracted by the dunya and material things in our life. And that's very important. The material things are very easy to get distracted to. So that's it. The focus should be what? The akhirah, right? And we all need reminders of this. So as a rule, like fiqh, as a rule of Islamic law, there's nothing wrong with decorating the masajid and things like this. But the companions, what we're saying is the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahaba, they did this, but they expanded, they beautified the masjid as well, but they understood the deen much better. So, they had this balance. And that's the thing. So we take their actions, that this is obviously permissible to do this. But the Sahaba, they lived, at the time, they had no issues and no problems, and they did not complain about this. So that's a very important point. Just to finish off, like we said, a lesson we learn is Iman, work on our Iman, our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, strengthen our Iman, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the understanding and the ability to do this. So we'll go ahead and we will stop there. And next time, next session, we'll pick up and continue going forward. What happens next in the life of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Jazakallah khair for attending and listening in. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability, understanding, and a love for the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك